Israel's demand since day one of the war has been that all hostages must be released immediately and unconditionally, and that's a demand that was echoed by even the UN Secretary General. There is no excuse for Hamas to hold on to hostages. We have, I'm afraid, normalized hostage taking. This isn't a deal. There was hostage taking, and now there is a ransom payment. And President Trump is thumping on the table and saying all the hostages have to be released. I think the Israeli statement is slightly more ambiguous. Obviously, we want to get everyone out immediately, but we also have a ransom agreement that has been agreed, and we need Hamas to continue releasing the hostages. Israeli society is deeply agitated right now. We all saw the scenes of the 3 hostages coming out last week. Everyone in Israel said they looked like Holocaust survivors hobbling out of Auschwitz. And the stories that we've been hearing, the signs of life from hostages inside, are absolutely horrific. Just yesterday, a young chap by the name of Eylon celebrated his 24th birthday. The survivors say that he still has shrapnel in his eye that has gone untreated for nearly 500 days since the October 7th massacre, that he's chained in a tunnel underground, that he's being starved. And so there is no time to get the hostages out. They shouldn't be there till Saturday. They shouldn't be there till the end of the ceasefire agreement. Yeah. They should come out now.
Obviously, the ceasefire deal has a phased release of hostages, so it would just be about sticking to what's been agreed between Israel and Hamas and brokered by other interested parties involved. It would just be about sticking to that. And we should point out, look, we get plenty of times when we talk about what Israel has to say about their hostages, and you're absolutely right to point out the condition of the hostages released last Saturday, how thin and how pale and how ill they looked. But also people will text in to us here on the show and say, what about the 46,000 odd Palestinians who have been killed? Why aren't we seeing pictures of dead women, of dead children, of brutally, horribly injured, innocent people, because journalists have not been allowed into Gaza? So I will put that bit of context forward. But I must just ask you whether Donald Trump is interfering too much. He's completely directing the proceedings, and your Prime Minister is simply parroting off a similar line afterwards. But it is Donald Trump who seems to be in charge here. Is that wise?
First of all, I'll say the images of the suffering inside Gaza have been played on repeat on international television screens around the world. There is intense suffering in Gaza.
Not of people being killed and brutally injured, though.
There have been horrific images coming out, and there are horrific images coming out because the Hamas government of Gaza decided on October 7th to declare war, to fight that war from under civilian buildings, and to refuse to surrender and release the hostages. I don't think there has been any shortage of those images that Hamas has allowed out of Gaza. But to your question about President Trump has decided to reshuffle the deck. He has entered the Oval Office and said, clearly foreign policy orthodoxy isn't working. Clearly the strategy that was tried by the previous administration, clearly the approach to the conflict by foreign powers in the past has not worked, because we are 16 months into this war that Hamas declared on October 7th, and there are still hostages stuck inside Gaza. And so I think his statement that all hell will break loose if the hostages are not released is what we should have heard from all world leaders on day one of the war. The question, of course, is against whom all hell is going to break loose. I'm not sure it's going to work against Hamas, because Hamas is a jihadi death cult. It's a jihadi death cult that has no compunctions about fighting to the last child, and that is why it is an evil regime that must be removed.
Okay, and so what does Donald Trump mean here? Does he mean that Israel is going to engage again in combat in Gaza? What do we interpret his words to mean?
I think what President Trump means is a green light for Israel to resume the military campaign against the Hamas regime until it is removed from power and its military is destroyed.
You are being directed by Donald Trump here. Does that not make the Israeli Prime Minister look a bit weak?
On the contrary, Israel set out its goals at the beginning of the war, after Hamas's invasion on October 7th. It laid out 3 goals. 1, to remove Hamas from power and destroy its military. 2, to return all the hostages. And 3, to make sure that Gaza can never pose a threat to Israel ever again. Israel agreed to this ransom agreement because we have to get out the hostages who are being starved and tortured in the dungeons underneath Gaza. But Donald Trump is saying he will give Israel a green light to resume that military campaign. But I think if we want to get the hostages out, that pressure needs to be brought to bear on Hamas's state sponsors. The difference between Hamas and ISIS is that it has patrons: Qatar, Turkey, Iran. These are UN member states that back Hamas, that fund it, that give it diplomatic support. And if those countries, if Qatar, Turkey and Iran begin to feel the heat, if they begin to feel the consequences for allowing the Hamas regime to do what it has done, then maybe Hamas will stop thinking of the hostages as an asset and start thinking of them as a liability instead.
Look, thank you for speaking to us. Eylon Levy, former Israeli government spokesperson. Good to have you on.